Welcome to Cliburn Masterpiece. I'm Buddy Bray. I'm your host for this series, and we come to you from the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. Cliburn Masterpiece is a series in which we take a look at the best works ever written for solo piano. We talk to special guests and we get the insights of our Cliburn laureates as well. Many musicians regard him as the greatest composer who ever lived. Johann Sebastian Bach was so prolific, particularly in the area of keyboard music, and he wrote 7 toccatas for solo keyboard. We're going to talk to 2017 Silver Medalist Kenny Broberg about what the word toccata means, and we'll look at his favorite toccata by J.S. Bach. That's all in this episode of Cliburn Masterpiece. Here's our chat with Kenny. Can we talk about first what a toccata is?
Yeah, sure. So a toccata can mean a lot of different things over the hundreds of years that the term has been used. The most modern toccata that I've played was actually at the Cliburn competition. It was the commission piece by Marc-Andre Hanlon. And this is kind of, actually that's interesting because it's kind of the fusion of this idea of, now a toccata has become sort of a virtuosic, perpetual motion kind of piece, which it definitely, in the Bach toccatas, it definitely has that aspect to it. But I think that Bach's toccatas really come from Buxtehude's organ pieces, and this is kind of a more rhapsodic sort of fantasia-like structure is what it indicates, and this is definitely true for this Bach toccata in C minor, that it is has a bunch of contrasting sections. It has fugal sections. It has sort of recitativo sections, and it has slower, more adagio section right at the beginning. So it's a lot of different things at once.
Can we talk about the sort of extroverted nature of this toccata? I mean, just right from the very beginning, it's a little extroverted. It's also it sounds a little improvisatory.
Yeah, it's definitely like sort of a recitativo improvisatory kind of first page before it settles into an adagio slower section.
And it just seems like from the second bar already, he's settled into a groove, really. And then that whole first toccata section is sort of based on this rhythm. And it sort of makes the whole thing hang together a little bit better to me. Is it important to you in this first section to play the rhythms exactly as they are on the page, or do you give yourself a little freedom in terms of rhythm and tempo in the first section?
Well, yes and no. I don't always do exactly what's on the page, but I'm thinking of doing exactly what the tradition is of the way that we play this music. It's definitely has a freer, sort of connotation to it. I do not play everything at the same tempo, although I want it to make it feel like it's all the same tempo, but it definitely is not.
What role then does the pedal play in how you perform these work? I'm thinking particularly of when it gets to the adagio.
Yeah, right.
Which seems like there's some legato sort of baked into the adagio to begin with.
now that you've isolated this particular section, it's not just a sort of philosophical discussion of whether it's right to use pedal in Bach, or now it's also like the instrumentation that I'm thinking of. If, for instance, if this part, it's 4-voice texture. So if I was going to imagine that this is woodwinds or something like that, I might use less pedal than I like to think of it as sort of like a madrigal kind of voices, so yeah, usually I use, depending on how wet the hall is, usually I use quite a bit of like connecting legato pedal. I don't think that one way is really right or wrong. Essentially, when we play Bach on the piano, it's already a transcription, just in and of itself. So, there is a lot that we don't know about performance style in Bach. So we're already recreating our own Bach every time we play it.
So Kenny, we've talked about the adagio, that middle part that you vividly said sounded like a madrigal to you, or it sort of invokes a madrigal to you, 4 voices. Speaking of voices, the next thing to come along in this Bach Toccata is a long section of music that is based on this. And it's really a fugue. We refer to it in music as a fugue. Can you tell us a little bit more about what a fugue actually is? What happens in a fugue?
Sure. So this fugue starts with what is called a subject. And this one is kind of a lengthy subject. And that's the subject. When the second voice comes in, you know that the subject is done because the second voice is going to repeat it in a different key. And eventually the third voice comes in, and that's the bass voice. So these 3 voices develop sort of the same material, and they're independent of each other, but when they come together, they form a whole.
Can we talk about articulation just a little bit? How do you decide how this goes? I mean, how do you decide what the character of it is? It could be that, or it could be this.
I've played it a bunch of different ways with a bunch of different articulations. I like to try to keep the articulation pretty much constant throughout, and if I change it, I want there to be a specific reason that I change it. That okay, it's this time it's in E flat major, and I want this one to be special. So I want to do something different. I ended up doing the articulation. Oh, sorry. Especially with most people do it sort of. And I kind of wanted to slur the last 2 notes because I wanted it to have a little bit more of a dance-like feel to it. So that was my reasoning for doing that. But you could come up with any articulation and be able to provide a, pretty good argument for it.
Can we talk a little bit then about the whole question of dynamics in Bach and what's loud and what's soft? He didn't leave us a roadmap about that either. But what made me think about that was you were talking about that you might play when the fugue subject comes in the key of E flat. You might play that a little bit differently because you want to make it more special to characters.
At the beginning, I used to start at pianissimo. There's any number of ways. You could do it, and I think this is one of the really fun things about this piece. You get to be so creative, and you get to kind of create your own version of what this piece might be. And I don't really do it the same way every single time. However, there has to be sort of a musical continuity to the way that you're approaching this and an understanding of the style.
I want to ask also, we've gotten here already, which is the sort of fugue part. What happens next?
It's a 3-voice texture all the way throughout. So so there's two fugues in the piece. Basically, they're separated by a fermata, and the second fugue is a double fugue. Is how I interpret it. So I when the second fugue comes back, I usually take it, or when the second fugue starts, I usually take a pianissimo. And what I mean by a double fugue is that I consider both of these to be subjects. So this before is kind of an accompanimental figure, but because of how it's developed in the second fugue, I consider it to be of equal importance to what has already been established as the main subject in the fugue.
Are fugues scary?
I like fugues. Yeah, they are scary. It's kind of, if you get off the rails with them, it's hard to get back on.
Sure is. So it's walking that tightrope. Is that sort of an attractive thing about fugues, sort of walking that tightrope, or is the order and logic of a fugue something that attracts you?
Yeah, I definitely really appreciate the, especially the way the Bach handles a fugue. I find it so beautiful. His writing style in that way, and yeah, I like the fugue in and of itself because of how, you know, all the different parts come together to, you know, and you can separate them individually and they all make sense, and you can put them together and they make even more sense. So that to me, I think is very beautiful.
Okay, so just to recap, the piece is a piece in sort of three big sections, but there are two fugues. So we have this toccata section right at the very beginning, that whole business, which leads to the adagio.
Leads to slow part.
And then after that, there is a transition to the first fugue. That goes on a while. And then we have that subject plus a little company there. So when you're playing this, do you like to think of the whole piece as sort of a big architecture, and is that in your mind when you're performing?
Yes, I think that is to really give like a truly artistic performance. That's always the key. The difficulty, the main difficulty of performance is combining structure with expression within the structure. And I think about this constantly. I think in Bach, a lot of times the piece goes pretty much directly to the end. It always has its, you know, ebbs and flows, but somewhere in there it kind of gains steam and always goes straight to the end.
Is this something, when you're thinking about structure, is it something that you can practice? Is it something that you think about when you practice, or is it something that mostly has to sort of cook in your brain away from the piano, or is it both?
Yeah, it's both. It's kind of an understanding of the overall harmonic progression in the piece, and combining that with the texture and where he's going with the piece emotionally. There's a lot of sort of indefinable factors. Basically, getting a large scale structure, which I think this piece kind of is, even though it's not really a very long piece. It really, when it's played very well, you really get the sense that it's like a big, you know, architectural building, you know. and that just takes some time. I've never gotten that on the first performance of a piece. So you can play a piece for the first time and it sounds very good, but the structure is never there the way it is after repeated performances, for me at least.
What particularly attracted you to this toccata? Why this one instead of the other 6?
Right. So this is probably the most famous of the toccatas. They're all kind of difficult to figure out what to do with because they're very sparsely written. You need to know enough about the style to know where to add things, because it doesn't really work to play it exactly the way it's written in the score. So these are kind of complicated pieces in that way. And this C minor toccata, I learned actually when I was a kid. So probably, like 12 years ago. And so I've played it a bunch. It's not the only Bach toccata that I've worked on, but I think it's the most successful one for me.
Our thanks to Kenny Broberg for talking to us today about this Bach Toccata in C minor. You're going to hear a performance of that from the 2017 edition of the Van Cliburn International Competition. Here is silver medalist Kenny Broberg.
dynamic performance of Bach's C minor toccata from the 2017 edition of the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. You were listening to Silver Medalist Kenny Broberg in that performance. I'm Buddy Bray. Thanks for watching Cliburn Masterpiece.